today for this great topic. We've been working on this for a couple of weeks, and as you know, in that period of time, we've been hearing more about the state and hopefully more locally even plans working on how we will begin to reopen. But we don't have anything in a definite way of a plan yet, and so we are very thrilled to have our very distinguished panel here with us to present this topic, talking about the executive orders that have placed restrictions and limitations on short-term rentals. So I'd like to introduce our panel to you today. We have Bridget Sykes, Esquire with Fox Rothschild, LLP. Chris Bezaire from Coldwell Banker Saul Needles Real Estate. Chris is also serving as the president of the Cape May County Board of Realtors. And we have Christopher Mooney with Surety Title Company, and Chris is also currently a member of the Cape May County Chamber Board of Realtors. So we do welcome them today to share their knowledge and expertise of the real estate market and short-term rental transactions. And especially relative to these restrictions on short-term rentals. We are going to take questions, as Nina was talking about. We're going to take them at the end of the program. And so, as she mentioned, you can, throughout the program, type those into the chat. We will get to as many questions as we can. Depending on how many questions that we have. We may not be able to get to all of them, but I will be going through the questions and reading them as the moderator at the end of the program. And some of the questions may duplicate, and as best as I can, I may, try to combine some of those. So appreciate your patience with me as I work through that process. And with that, I am going to turn the program now over to Bridget. Bridget, thank you so much, and the webinar is yours.
Vicki, and welcome to everybody. This really came about because as soon as all of the restrictions that got put in place by the governor and then down through the counties and the municipalities, we started getting a lot of calls from real estate companies, from people who own houses at the shore, from potential renters. So this really is addressing all of the different questions that we've gotten in the last month or so as all of the orders have been coming out, and trying to look towards the future of how we can address issues. Additionally, I have closed probably about 10 transactions in the last 6 weeks. So other issues that just came up in the day-to-day closing and situations like that, we wanted to address and things to look out for. So with that, we'll start with addressing the short-term rentals. We're going to go through some rental contract issues, liability concerns, and then Bezaire will talk about some suggested uniform rental procedures for if the rental ban is lifted, and I am all hoping that it is. So to start, right now, the restriction that's in place from the Cape May County Board of Realtors specifically says that it is illegal to give possession of the premises to a transient guest or a seasonal tenant, and violators are subject to prosecution as disorderly persons. So the reason this is really important is for existing contracts, it essentially has made the substance of the contract illegal. So a lot of questions that we got initially are, we've had contracts that have been put in place for months and this has not been addressed. So how do we address the issue? So one of the common law doctrines about contracts is that if it's unenforceable on grounds of public policy, then both parties to the contract are excused from performance. So here, if there's an absolute rental restriction in place, the contract is going to be deemed to be unenforceable by both parties. If the act of giving possession to a potential renter is prohibited by a rental restriction, then neither party is really legally allowed to perform the substance, and both parties should be restored to their original positions. Another common law doctrine that comes into play on that issue is the impossibility and practicability defense. This is an absolute defense to performance. If it's impossible or inordinately difficult to perform because of a supervening event. So for existing contracts that didn't address this issue, specifically within the terms, then this would be considered a supervening event that neither party contemplated at the time that they entered into the contract. And based on that, the people can raise this defense of impossibility or impracticability. And then finally, there is frustration of purpose. So this is where performance is technically possible, but there is a supervening event that has really fundamentally changed the overall bargain of the parties. So this is really going to come into play with a lot of the questions that we've gotten about maybe the rental restriction gets lifted, but I'm really not comfortable anymore going to the shore. I'm somebody with a pre-existing medical condition, or I'm somebody who has family that has a medical condition. And likewise, on the other side, we have a lot of property owners that have been calling and saying, do I have to allow people to stay in my house? I'm not comfortable with this. I also stay there on off weeks, or I'm worried about with the turnover, somebody suing me. So this is another defense that might be raised where maybe it's possible to be able to, give possession to the property if a rental ban is lifted, but the parties still don't want to move forward with the rental. So there's three sets to this. We need to address the existing leases that are in place that this wasn't contemplated at all. Then you need to address in new leases all of these issues, because now we're aware of all of the problems that have been going on. And then finally, we should be looking to the future and really reviewing your form of lease to see how you can address these issues in the future. The existing leases, the best thing you can do is really attempt to amicably resolve this with both parties by entering into an addendum. I know a lot of the real estate brokers have been doing this. I've seen probably 5 or 6 versions of addendums that have been proposed for people who have existing leases, and also that are being used for leases, for new leases of property. I've drafted a few, and I've also drafted a few on behalf of just potential of existing renters or owners that didn't go through the real estate company. So the main things that you really need to address in all of these leases and addendums are: who gets to cancel? Is this going to be just the owner of the property or the tenant? When can they cancel? Do we have to wait until the day that the tenancy is supposed to start and see if there's a rental restriction in place? Or are there other issues that everybody wants to acknowledge that they should be permitted to cancel over? And that, again, is going to be really tied to people who are really uncomfortable with renting property due to medical conditions or fear of contracting the virus. And then the next concern is what happens to prepaid rentals and fees. A lot of the forms that I've been seeing, and I think everyone's pretty much agreed that because these are short-term rentals and all of the money is paid well in advance of the beginning of the rental term, that the rental fees are basically being held in escrow until the day that the rental term is supposed to begin. And then if the rental restrictions in place at that time, then the tenant would be refunded all of their rent, subject to potential deductions for some fees or commissions, depending on the commission contracts. And then it also needs to be addressed is if we do lift the rental restriction, which I think that we will, the biggest concern going forward is going to be if there's a spike in infections, there's a strong chance that the restriction gets put back in place sometime in the summer. So if something were to happen within the term of a rental or right before it, need to put some kinds of terms in place about what happens and if they are permitted to cancel within a reasonable amount of time before. If it happens in the middle, is it automatically deemed a canceled contract? Does the tenant have to leave? Do they have to give notice? And how is the money that they've already prepaid going to be refunded to them? And then the final issue to really address, this has come up more recently in some calls that I've had with clients, is what kind of waivers, releases, and disclosures related to exposure and diagnosis can be included? A lot of questions about liability have turned on, if I own the property, what happens if someone says that they got sick and they're trying to blame it on me? So short-term rentals are governed by landlord-tenant law, even if it says in the contract that it's not considered to be a landlord-tenant relationship. The courts will really impose liability and the duty of care based under landlord-tenant law. So what the law is that the landlord is liable if they conceal a condition involving unreasonable risk of harm, if the tenant doesn't know or have reason to know of the condition or risk, and the landlord knows or has reason to know of the condition. and realizes or should realize the risk involved and has reason to expect the tenant will not discover the condition or realize the risk. So renters are going to be tasked with ultimately proving that the rental property was the source of any contracted illness, but owners need knowledge of the risk of contraction as well. And in that context, it's really going to be about making sure that anybody that comes through the property has some type of reporting requirement to the property owner if they or anyone in their rental party was previously infected, or if after they leave the property, somebody does test positive, that they should report back because of the incubation period. Another question that we've had is, what happens if somebody gets sick during the rental term? Some of these are a week, some of them are 2, 3, 4 weeks long. Do I have to allow them to stay in my property? So the isolation measures that are in the statute says that it's by the least restrictive means necessary to protect the public health. There's really no laws out there that say that somebody has to quarantine or take place at the person's location at the time that they're diagnosed. The only issue that might arise is if the person's primary home is a distance from where the rental property is, either out of the country or states away where they're not able to easily go back to another location. It's really going to be the duty of the property owner to then advise the future renters of the potential exposure at the property if somebody got sick while they were at the property or after. So in this, provisions that can be included in leases, a mutual acknowledgement of the existence of COVID-19 and risk of exposure. So I think it would be pretty hard at this point for anybody to say that they had no idea that coronavirus was happening, or that it's pretty much everywhere within the state of New Jersey, including in Atlantic County and Cape May County. But it's always better to have these things put into writing, just so that nobody can say after the fact that they didn't realize that there was any type of risk involved. And then a mutual waiver and release from liability from the property owner and from the renters. Also really important to include some type of affirmative obligation on the renters to give notice if anyone in their rental party has been diagnosed with COVID-19 prior to the rental term and or after the rental term, so that the property owner can put anybody else on notice that comes into the property that there may be a risk of exposure. And again, if the tenant becomes ill during the rental term, what is the tenant required to do? They need to immediately vacate the property. If they stay over because of a quarantine order, will they have to pay rent outside of the rental term? Issues like that should be addressed. All right, so now I'm going to turn it over to Chris Bezaire to talk about some guidelines for rentals and turnovers and moving forward.
Thank you, Bridget. Again, thanks everybody for joining today. That's a lot of information Bridget gave you guys. I don't have nearly as much stuff, but some basic guidelines to go over. For the last couple of weeks, as a board for Cape May County, we've been working with a lot of brokers and dealing with a lot of questions of facilitation of the leases. Bridget went over a lot of the legal clarifications for cancellations and facilitating them, but we've been having a lot of questions as far as what we need to do as offices to maintain the best possible safety practices we can for our employees and for the tenants when they do get here. As an association, we can't come up with a blanket policy that everybody has to follow. So the guideline that we've used as a board so far is available to all the Board of Realtor members, is a copy of the CDC guidelines for proper cleaning of a property, as well as, so I'm jumping ahead. I'm sorry, Bridget. I'll get that in a second. There we go. Guidelines from the health department as well, which they just gave out about a week and a half ago. So that's all we can give to the each office and advise them to hand them out to the owners as well as any cleaning companies they may be using. Going back over the guideline, the PowerPoint we have, some of the things we started looking at are check-in procedures, which was the last slide. We've advised every city's brokers to get together and try to do something uniformly across the board in each municipality so that everybody's handling rentals the same. The first thing starting with check-in. I know in Cape May at least, we've all agreed that there will be curbside or mobile check-in and out this year. Offices will be having tables set up outside to do check-ins. Anybody that has a remote lock or a programmable lock, the code can be given out. And as far as checkout, the same thing, either having a bin or a mail slot to put keys in. That way, we're not allowing a rush of people into our offices, which threatens the health of our employees, but also each other and the tenants. We've also added that we're going to be doing extra sets of keys, so we're not using the same keys between check-ins, so that gives us a chance to sanitize the keys between check-ins, so that way we're not running the risk of the keys having the virus on it and being transferred. Go to the next slide. That's where we talk about the health department. The check-in kit, that's just a recommendation for cleaners or owners possibly. As realtors and brokers, we can't provide tenants with all this every time they check in. But what we have done, at least amongst the Cape May brokers, is put a general letter together that we're sending to all of our tenants and all owners. And part of that letter to the tenant is that while the owners have been reminded to provide all these items for their tenants and have extra on hand, that the only way that tenants can really be certain they have the items they need is to bring them with them. So, you know, the wipes, hand sanitizers, any PPE equipment, our letter is encouraging tenants to bring that with them, as well as telling the owners to make sure they have extra supply on hand. There we go. There we go. Some offices have talked about pushing times back 2 hours temporarily for check-in. This has been a big discussion amongst a bunch of different areas: Avalon, Stone Harbor, Ocean City, Sea Isle, Cape May. In the end, what was decided in Cape May, at least, and this will be different from town to town, but the lease, as a broker, we're not party to the lease. We only facilitate it. So, you know, the lease is between the tenants and the owners. So anything that's in the lease is what's agreed upon between the owners and the tenants. We can recommend pushing the check-in time back a little bit to allow for more cleaning, but we can't really force any owners to do that. So what we've suggested is to the owners, if they do want to change any terms of their lease, including check-in time, that they have to notify all of the offices that are handling that rental, and as well as the tenants, and then we'll try to help facilitate that later check-in time. There was some concern that adding 2 hours for cleaning might just encourage cleaners to add more properties as opposed to spending more time in each property. That was one concern brought up. So this slide was actually done before our Cape May meeting. So we asked for the 4 p.m. check-in, but again, that was just a recommendation, and what we're doing in our market at least is on a case-by-case basis. If an owner decides to push it back, then we'll let tenants know. Other suggested things we've given to the owners. Typically, the tenant brings their own linens and towels or has to provide them from a rental company. It's been suggested in cleaning guidelines that soft materials not be left behind in a rental as well. So that would include pillows, blankets, comforters. It's very easy to clean the hard surfaces, but sometimes the fabrics can carry the virus into it as well. Again, protective mattress covers, if they can get them to be utilized, that way it prevents a tenant's sheets from transferring any bacteria or contamination from the sheets to the mattress, which in turn would contaminate the next set of sheets being put on. And again, these are all just suggested actions that we gave our owners to consider and to pass along to their cleaning companies. And each owner will have to make a decision on whether they want to do this or not, and make sure the tenant is aware of what their policy is.
Thanks, Chris. I would chime in on that with the cleaning companies. What was that? I'm sorry. Okay. I would chime in on with
Bridget,
the cleaning companies. Am I? Shouldn't be on mute.
I think we can hear Bridget fine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I was going to say on the issue with the cleaning companies, an additional point is you should make sure that the cleaning companies that are being hired are insured, and that they are providing at least some type of, you know, written guideline on how they're cleaning the properties, because that is another avenue of protection for property owners. If they were to be sued, they are contracting out the cleaning of the property to a third party.
Having technical difficulty here. That's better. Can you hear me?
Let me know.
Chris, we can hear you. Can you hear us, Chris?
You know, I'm sorry, I had technical difficulties there.
Okay, no worries.
Yeah. So was that the last? I think that was the last thing we had, right, Bridget?
Yeah. And I was just saying that an issue that everybody should address too is the cleaning companies that they're hiring to make sure that they're insured and that they're providing some written guidelines on how they're cleaning the properties, because that gives the property owners some additional protection if they were to be sued because they did contract out the cleaning of the property to a third party, to make sure that they're taking the proper actions. I know that you're concerned about people just adding additional properties as opposed to spending more time cleaning. That might be a way to address that concern.
And then the last thing I have real quick before we pass it on to Chris Mooney, obviously the elephant in the room. I know everybody wants a date and we don't have that yet, but I could just let you guys know that the county has put something together that actually did get sent to the governor this morning. And very, very shortly, everybody will know what the county's planning as far as short-term rentals is. So I'd love to say what it is, but it's coming soon. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And there is a differentiation between seasonal rentals and short-term weekly rentals. The seasonals will be allowed before short-term rentals, but again, that announcement should be coming from the county within the next day or so.
All right, that's great. And I would say, then if you see the light at the end of the tunnel, and I know everyone's going to be really excited once the rental ban is lifted, and some concern about the contract terms might kind of fall by the wayside, but contracts are really about being prepared for the worst case scenario, and we all got hit with the worst case scenario here. So even though restrictions might be lifted, it's still really important to make sure that everyone's addressing all of the different issues that might arise, because this might come back around in the next few months or even in future rentals next summer. So I think that everybody really needs to take the time to have their contracts, reviewed by an attorney for form leases, and then coming up with a good addendum that they can provide. And I always say too, just make sure you let the owners and even any prospective tenants know that just because you have a form of lease and a form of addendum, it's not carved in stone. If they have other concerns, they can still add things in and make changes between the parties. So with that being said, we can move on to issues related to closing real estate transactions. We'll talk about just some precautions that are being taken in marketing and selling properties. Sorry, Chris Bezaire, you're not completely off the hook yet. And then some issues that I've seen in doing attorney review of contracts of sale that should be discussed with your clients. And then Chris Mooney will talk about different issues related to title and how to coordinate closing with social distancing. With that, I'll turn it back over to Chris to go over safety precautions and things like open houses, letting people come in for viewing, stuff like that.
Yeah, these are three of the websites and criteria that NAJAR, the New Jersey Association of Realtors, has given its members as far as guidance on how to properly show property and maintain business during this time. They are not recommending any offices be open to the public. Some of the other tips on here on one-on-one showings, if you have a group or a family that wants to see a property, to try to make them either go into one-on-one instead of the whole group coming in. Obviously making sure you're wearing your proper PPE equipment, gloves, masks, making sure you check with owners, well, brokers, the other agent, and the owners to make sure they're comfortable with people going through their property. We do have a lot of vacant properties in this area that are easy to show. However, some owners have been reluctant to allowing anybody through right now. Open houses are all supposed to be done virtually right now. I know there's a couple title companies out there. I think Chris is one of them that doing offering virtual open houses through Facebook live streams or other methods of social media, so that you can still do the open houses but without having anybody in the property. And the Ocean City Board also put out a guidance as well in regards to some of these issues, but those are the basic guidelines, and just making sure that you're keeping your distance when you are showing a property, having the correct protective equipment on, and making sure that it's disclosed to everybody. The owner knows, that the agents know, the prospective buyer knows that you're going into a property. The one other suggestion that was on there that is being allowed right now is that if you have a waiver signed from a listing broker and the owner. The JAR is saying they are allowing the tenants to go in unaccompanied by the showing agent if all parties have been disclosed, and that's allowed. So that's mainly the guidelines that have been set forth as far as showings right now.
Thanks, Chris. So contracts of sale, some areas that everybody should be concerned with and discussing with clients when they're putting them together. The two most important things are timing in the contract. Are things going to be feasible due to current restrictions that are in place? And what are risks of exposure to persons entering the property, which is a lot of what Chris just talked about. So the first is TOE clauses. Everybody always defaults to this in contracts, and normally it's, you know, a positive thing, especially for sellers. But, you know, right now there should be some type of a right for either party to extend closing due to COVID-19 specific delays. That can be either with mortgage financing, municipal offices being closed, difficulties in getting inspections and repairs done in a timely manner. I know in the form leases or in the form contracts of sale, there's also the generally always the 14 days for inspections to be done and then for the repairs to be done after that. So that's another area where the timing comes into play. Municipal closures. I know that there's some problems right now in different municipalities with how they're scheduling to do C of O and zoning certificates because they're down in staff or they are not sending people out into the field as often. I also know that some municipalities are actually issuing a temporary CO and then having it put on the owner once it's purchased to have the actual inspection done to make sure it's there. So that should be accounted for in a contract. That, you know, usually the contract doesn't survive closing, but if there's any issue with the owner, the purchaser getting the CO after the fact, that they have some type of recourse against a seller. And then finally, waivers and releases for persons entering the property, for walkthroughs, inspections, and other transaction-related site visits. Like Chris said, I've seen at least one version of a form that is a waiver, release, and indemnification for both the seller and the buyer and their agents and any inspectors entering the property, that they acknowledge any risk of contracting COVID-19 while there and that they're waiving any rights and holding the other party harmless. So that's another thing to consider adding into the contract of sale. Okay, I'm going to kick it over to Chris Mooney from Surety Title to talk about some different issues that have come up with title insurance and then with how to close transactions using social distancing.
Can everyone hear me?
Yes, Chris, we can hear you.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I was having technical issues as well. My apologies. Good morning to everyone, and thanks for tuning in. I'm just going to touch on, during this pandemic, we've had one additional document on the title side that we're having parties sign off on, both buyer and seller. That is the affidavit of understanding and indemnity and the hold harmless agreement due to the COVID-19 virus. So in a nutshell, what we're having these folks do, both buyer and seller, is sign in the presence of a notary and attest and affirm that there are no additional liens or encumbrances which can be filed from the time that they sign to the time that the documents are recorded and filed in the courthouse. Why would that be an issue? Well, when COVID hit, there was some concern with the shutdown of all the government buildings and particularly the courthouses where we have everything recorded, that there would be a delay in things becoming on record and on file, which would lead to some issues in the future. So we had the affidavit signed, and we feel comfortable now where we are with recordings, particularly in Cape May County. We haven't seen a delay in any recordings at all to date. That's a compliment to Rita and her staff in the courthouse. They're doing a wonderful job as far as when we get things over to them, getting them on record and back to us so we can issue policies. So we're not really seeing a big concern when it comes to recording issues, particularly in Cape May County. We're actually in a pretty good spot when it comes to that. So this affidavit is for that purpose, but in Cape May County, it's not really a really big need at this time. Again, if there's a second wave of COVID and things get worse and the courthouse does shut down, this may be relevant at that point in Cape May County, but at this time, it's not really an issue that we're dealing with. And that's the only additional document from a title perspective that we're having people sign. That's all I have as far as that goes on the recording end. Bridget, did you have any questions regarding the recording side? If not, I can just jump into more of what where our challenges are, and that's just the coordination of closings at this time.
No, you can go ahead.
Okay, so I'll just move right along and whip you through here. So to simplify it in the most simple terms, the biggest change is the social distancing, or in terms of settlements, we're not able to have settlements the way that we traditionally had them, where buyer, seller, realtors, attorneys, lenders would all come to our office, sit down in a nice room, and we would consummate the closing, and everyone would leave happy. That's not the case at all anymore. That's actually in the rearview mirror as to how settlements are being held now. So moving forward, what we're doing with the social distancing and with it, we have restrictions on how we can coordinate settlements and how we are coordinating them moving forward. Here, up in front of you is a list of it's basically a menu list of what we can do and provide to customers to help move the transaction forward in a efficient manner and more in an accommodating manner to both buyer and seller. So whereas it used to be that we would look at a transaction as one transaction, I think now we're taking a step back and we're looking at the transaction in two different phases. There's a buyer side and there's a seller side, and we're coordinating them differently and speaking to each party individually and finding out exactly what accommodation they would need in order to consummate the deal. And if you look at the sheet in front of you, those are the options that we have right now. It used to be that we had like 2 or 3 options. As you can see, there's probably 5 or 6 on there now. That list is growing as we speak, probably. The newest one at the bottom is the latest and greatest. It's called RIN, which is an acronym for Remote Ink Sign Notarization. And I would just caution that this is only, I believe, a week old. It just got passed through Governor Murphy's desk last week or the week before into law. And it's allowing us, in a nutshell, to basically do closings via teleconference. To dumb it down to simplest terms, it's basically we send out documents to both buyer and seller. And when they receive them, we jump onto a teleconference call with them. And we witness them signing the documentation via teleconference. They send it back to us, and then we would stamp and notarize it and send it into the courthouse for recording. As you can see, just to run down the list real quick, we have the traditional settlement, which isn't so traditional anymore, which is where people would come into our office, we would sign, and they would sign and notarize. And the thing to realize is, again, this wouldn't be both buyer and seller. This would be staggered so that we would have a buyer come at a specific time, or a buyer's party come at a specific time, and a seller's party come at a specific time, which would be staggered. Again, that goes back to the social distancing and not having a big group together. As you go down the list, we have the in-office settlements, which are outside of our building. That is almost what a lot of us have seen as what a lot of people are looking to do. That's just more or less driving up to our office, staying in your car. We give you a clipboard with your documents. You take them in your car. You sign in the comfort of your car. We take them back. We notarize them, and we send you on your way. Next one after that is remote settlements. We will go to remote locations. We want to vet these locations that we're going to for concerns of the COVID. I wouldn't want to subject either the person that we're going to see or my staff to have them go into an environment that might be dangerous. Next after that is the mailaways, pretty self-explanatory. And then again, there's the newest, which is the RIN that we're seeing now. Things are changing by the minute. We're just trying to stay fluid and adapt to what's dealt to us at this time, and just try to keep our patients and accommodate everyone the best that we can at this point. That's all I have at this point. I guess I'll just answer questions when time comes.
I was going to go over, you talked about the remote ink notary, and you're right, it is about a week old. So I think that it's important to go through just what the requirements are, because not just title companies can do it, but if you're doing a mail away closing, I've had some people call and say, you know, I can't just go to the bank like I used to if I needed a notary. So how do I get a document notarized? So the use of the remote notaries is only permitted during the public health emergencies. So if successful, maybe they will pass it as a more permanent law, because a lot of other states do allow the use of remote notaries. All New Jersey attorneys are also allowed to notarize documents. So if you have an attorney, you can always call them as well if you need somebody to notarize. The basic requirements are that the parties have to be connected in real time using technology that allows simultaneous communication. So basically what we're doing right now, Zoom, Skype, FaceTime. Kind of just like an in-person notary, the notary still has to obtain evidence of the individual's identity, either because they know them, they have a credible witness swearing that that's the person's identity, or obtaining 2 forms of ID. The third requirement is the notary has to be able to reasonably confirm that the document that they have before them is the same document that the remote individual has signed, either by, you know, you can hold it up during the video conference to have the person confirm that that is the same document that they are signing. And then lastly, the notary has to do a recording of the performance of the notarial act, kind of the most important one, because the law requires that that video be maintained for 10 years, which is probably going to be the hardest part to be compliant with. The notary acknowledgement also has to provide specifically that it was performed using the communication technology. So the form notary blocks would have to be updated in documents. And finally, the only documents it doesn't apply to are documents governed by the UCC or divorce and family documents. That normally comes that often in a traditional real estate transaction, so it shouldn't be an issue. That being said, we'll turn it over, and if anybody has any questions about anything we talked about or would like some more information. Vicki, you're on mute still.
Hey. Sorry.
There we go.
Thanks for the presentation. Lot of information packed in there, and we do have some questions in the chat, and I'm sure we're going to have a few more. Just want to let everybody know that you will receive a copy of the presentation slides and the recording of today's webinar. Just on that note, all of our webinars that we've been having on the COVID-19 crisis, with the exception of one that we did with the Department of Labor Commissioner, have been recorded, and they are archived on our YouTube channel. So you can go back and retrieve any of them on YouTube under Cape May County Chamber. So feel free to check out what you might have missed in the meantime. So with that, let's dive into the questions. And the first question from Debbie, she's asking, is there a copy of a COVID-19 addendum that is public that everyone can use?
In terms of sales and rentals or sales, the New Jersey Board of Realtors has a contract addendum. I'm not sure if that was what the question was pertaining to or not. But for sales, the New Jersey Board of Realtors does have a contract addendum that's accessible through their library if you're a member of the Board of Realtors. For the public, I'm not sure if we have that on our public website or not. I'd have to double check with our executive officer to see if we have that on our public side.
Yeah, I would say it has to come through the Board of Realtors, because anything that, at least anything I've drafted for clients directly would be considered you know, client and attorney work product, so I can't just disassemble it. But basically, they all address the same questions that we went over in the beginning.
Okay. The next question is from Stephen. He's asking, is there any guidance on the use of pools?
Bridget, you want to go first?
I would say from a legal perspective, I have not seen anything specific about that. That's a new one.
That question was brought up in 2 separate meetings I've had, one with the county, one with the city of Cape May. And I think, Vicki, you were on that one. I think basically it said if it's a chlorine pool by nature, I mean, it kind of diminishes the transfer of the virus. There's no, recorded information on that, but it was more of the social distancing outside of the pool, making sure the chairs are 6 feet away. If you're sitting at a public pool or at a hotel or motel pool, but actually being in the pool itself, nobody seemed to have an answer on it, but they didn't seem to think it was a large concern because of the chlorine in the pool.
And in our guiding documents on reopening, we have sets of best practices, and specifically from the Hotel Lodging Association, we're going to have those recommended best practices posted on the chamber website as one source. And so, and there'll be an announcement when all of those things are posted. And so we'll let everybody know when we have all those ready to upload. And so, but there really has, as Chris is saying, been very little specific written about pools. It's been very short and concise, as he says, because whether it's that they don't know, or that there is the presumption that chlorine as a chemical is a deterrent to the virus. But what we have, we are going to make public. Yes. So the next question from John says, it may be difficult for owners to obtain enough supplies to leave for renters. Wipes and masks and sanitizers are hard enough to come by. Are there any suggestions?
Just like I said, we're recommending to tenants that we can't guarantee that. Even if the owner's trying to obtain those products and they can't get them, there's no guarantee. So the only way we can guarantee a tenant to have the materials they need is to make sure they bring them with them when they come down.
Okay. The next question from Henry. How is seasonal rental defined for purposes of rental restrictions this summer?
The county guidelines or the protocols and the reopening guide that we defined seasonal rentals as rentals with a length of 30 days or longer than 30 days, and short-term rentals are rentals that are 30 days or less. So any lease that has a term of greater than 30 days would be considered a seasonal rental under the guidelines of what the county task force has put together for the reopening plan.
Okay. Next question. For members of New Jersey Realtors, multiple addenda regarding COVID-19 are available on the zip forms library at njrealtor.com. I guess that's
I saw that. That was our executive officer just reminding, I guess, that those documents are available on that site.
Okay. The next is a question for Chris Mooney. It says, Chris, I am a New Jersey notary. Please describe for me a remote notary procedure.
On the remote notary procedures, we would either go to their home and have them sign in the comfort of their home, or at a place of business, or wherever is most convenient for them and that has the least vulnerability for or exposure to COVID.
I think that question was probably pointed more towards what Bridget went over, correct? I'm assuming with, he was asking for the process of how to do it properly.
Yeah, I think, and so, like I said, the main thing is that you're going to need to use some type of a video service to do it. So Zoom is free, so you could set up a Zoom. Zoom also has a recording function on it. So it would be to set up a Zoom video, make sure that the person who's signing the document has it on their end, and you have the copy of the same document on your end during the call. Make sure you get ID sent to you, driver's license, passports, credit cards, photo, and then you would have the document. You can hold the document up, make sure that the person on the other side is confirming that that is exactly what they're signing when you're witnessing it. So then, and then you would do it on your end, and then make sure in the notary block at the bottom that you're signing, it says that you witnessed it using computer technology.
Okay. Robert and Stephen are asking, are there any guidelines on hotel motel rentals and hotel motel short-term rentals?
I mean, you can answer that, Vicki, or I can. I mean, that's included in the outline for the county as well. And as far as when they will be allowed, they're on the same schedule as short-term rentals. As far as guidelines, there's also a set of guidelines from the industry that I think is included with the proposal, Vicki.
I'm sorry, say that again, Chris.
I think there were guidelines as far as suggested best practices or restrictions that the county included with the proposal that will be released that goes over those types of restrictions and policies.
Yes, that is correct. And would really ask everyone's patience that, you know, there are things in the county's recommended document that was sent to the governor's office that we're not at liberty to share until which time the county makes that a public document. So it's you know, soon to be released, but not anything that we can share in the particulars. And of course, everything is subject to what the governor announces in terms of his timeline. And I'm sorry, as Chris was speaking, I was trying to scroll through the questions here for a question that hasn't already been asked. I think the next question is from Brian. Is the tenant liable for payment of rent in the event of quarantine in a rental property?
I'm not touching that one, Bridget.
Yeah. So in the event of quarantine, I guess I might need clarification. If somebody is quarantined and has to stay in your property past the rental term, if they have to stay in your property, I would say they'd still have to pay for it if they couldn't go anywhere else. But if the question is, if somebody is quarantined and can't come to rent the property because of that, that would go to the common law defenses I was discussing at the beginning. Probably frustration of purpose would be a defense to whether they could perform because they're under a medical order that they can't, you know, they're completely restricted from being able to come and stay at your property. Those common law defenses, I will say, just so everyone kind of understands it though, that only would come up if you actually go to court, which is why having the addendums that go through the different issues that are going to be considered a good basis for canceling and getting people's money back should really be addressed, because the only other thing to do if it's not is to litigate it and have a court decide whether those legal doctrines would apply to the specific facts and circumstances that are coming before them. I think that was the question.
Okay. While folks on the webinar might be thinking of some other questions, I just wanted to let everybody know that the county has brought on board Joe Molyneux, who might be a familiar person to folks. Joe, for many, many years, worked for the Small Business Development Center, but they have brought Joe on as a consultant with Cape May County to assist in any loan applications or government programs that you might need assistance in filling out the paperwork or have questions or things like that. If Joe was not able to join us today on this webinar, otherwise I'd introduce him and let him give a personal hello. But I wanted to share his contact information. If you would like to talk to Joe about any questions you have about any of the government programs or anything that you think that he might be able to help you with, Joe's telephone number is 609-465-1085. And again, that's 609-465-1085. And so give Joe a call. He's available to walk you through the application processes on the PPP. I think the SBA EIDL loan program I heard yesterday, that program has been fully exhausted with the exception of agricultural businesses. The PPP is they're still funding loans on that. And the NJEDA has loan programs that are still being fulfilled. We're still working on getting information out to any other loan programs that we find out that might be helpful. to you or some of your clients or whatever. So Joe could be helpful to you. I also wanted to let everybody know that tomorrow the Chamber is hosting a digital town hall with our first legislative district, Senator Testa, Assemblyman Simonson, and Assemblyman McClellan. You can register for that on CapeMayCountyChamber.com and submit your questions in advance. So please do that. We'd love to have you join us tomorrow. And just looking to see if there have been any other questions submitted. And I don't see any. So I don't know, Bridget, Chris, if you have any other closing comments or remarks you'd like to make, I guess now would be the time.
Sure. I just wanted to say that all of our contact information is here on and will be on the slides that you distribute. So if there's some specific question that you wanted to ask as a follow-up, or that if you asked a question and we didn't understand what you were asking and you want to talk about it some more, you can call or email. I'm speaking on behalf of everyone. You can call or email any of us with your questions.
Chris?
Nope. I think I had said everything I needed to, so glad we were able to put this together.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, wait, actually, I did see a note right there. Anne Marie's right. My contact number is wrong. Should be 884, not 848.
Okay, I'll fix it.
Look at that in real time.
Yeah.
I did send it to you in advance, so.
Yeah. I didn't say it was your fault. It's my fault.
Well, thank you all very much. If you have an idea for a program that we could bring to you that would be helpful, please let us know. We'd be more than happy to work with you in doing that. And we look forward to the time when we can get back to normal, or whatever our new state of normal will be. So hope you all have a really great day, and enjoy the sunshine out there if you can. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Take care.